But with this movie, I see why, Ashley, you put the Teen Beat photos all over your wall. It makes sense. I wish I was with him. I wanted him to invite me into the middle of a lake somewhere with a bottle of tequila, his sax, and some Bach. I would be his boy. I'd be his ride or die with him.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Shat the Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I'm one of your co-hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And Ashley Schlafly.
Hi, y'all.
And each week, we take a look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. Each week, the audience selects from 6 movie choices that we break out in the race car VHS tape rewinder and watch the movie that tallied the highest number of votes. At the end of the podcast, we provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie would take to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and share with a friend. It's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, if you like what you hear here, subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, True Detective, and Watchmen. And coming up in August on HBO, it's Lovecraft Country, which will be me, Ashley Schlafly, and the King Bee. You can find all that information or past episodes at Shat on TV. And finally, for those who absolutely crave all our Shat, follow and subscribe to our Twitch channel, shatthemovies.com/Twitch, where you can catch both past and live content every week. In fact, we have live content Tuesday through Friday, every night on Twitch. Now, that being said, Big D, what movie are we reviewing today?
So before I get to this week's commission, I just wanted to make an announcement. We've shuffled up some of the upcoming schedule. And this is all on me, I'll be honest with you. It's been a couple eventful weeks for me with a funeral in New York. Then I thought I got the Rona. So it threw everything off. But I want everybody to know I apologize about that. I know how important the podcast is to you, and I will take complete ownership of that. So we've shuffled things around a little bit. So here's what the new schedule will look like. And sorry if I'm spoiling the upcoming schedule. But August 4th will now be Adventures in Babysitting. August 11th will be The Phantom Menace. August 18th will be Fletch Lives. So once that happens, we'll get all that. We're back on the schedule that's on the website. And again, life happens, but that's no excuse. I know that people out there hit the podcast refresh every Tuesday, and it means something to you. So I will double down my dedication to make sure that I'm there for you because you are always there for us. So then going with tonight's commission. The gravy train keeps running. The supporters of All Things Shat came through again, and there was a group of them this time. It was Dan Fletcher and Carmelita Valdez-McCoy said, we really love this movie. I know Gene loves it. I know that Ashley loves it. And we would love to hear you review the 1989 American black comedy teen film, Heathers.
Now, if you're on the fence about listening to a podcast dedicated solely to Heathers, you should know that this is a podcaster's podcast episode because Ashley Schlafly even kicked in a couple bucks to make this happen. And of course, she is on Shat the Movies and Shat on TV. And Carmelita also has her share of guest spots on several different podcasts. So Ash, if you could do the honors and tell us why this movie was commissioned.
Absolutely. So they write, Dear Diary, I mean Shat Crew. It seems fitting that this 80s classic exploring how social dynamics bring out the worst and best in all of us should be commissioned by a group of Shat Nation peers, the Heather Shat trifecta. Dan, already a fan of Slater and Ryder's other movies, loved Heather's pitch dark humor and clever dialogue in his late teens. He wonders what the Shat Crew thinks about how gun violence and suicide are portrayed. For Carmelita, a person with angst all the way back in elementary school, Heathers is the perfect expression of one of Generation X's greatest strengths to suffer hard knocks, but still find a way to laugh at the sick joke of it all. Big fans of fun and devoted Shat listeners, Dan Fletcher and Carmelita Valdez-McCoy.
Well, thank you, Dan and Carmelita and Ash, for commissioning this movie. Heathers is a 1989 American black comedy teen film written by Daniel Waters and directed by Michael Lehman in both of their respective film debuts. It stars Winona Ryder, Christian Slater, and Shannen Doherty. The film portrays 4 teenage girls, 3 of whom are named Heather, in a clique at an Ohio high school whose lives are disrupted by the arrival of a misanthrope intent on murdering the popular students and staging their deaths as suicides. The film was considered a flop when it was released, earning $177,000 in its opening weekend and ultimately grossing $1.1 million in the U.S. over 5 weeks. At the time of its release, Desson Thomson of the Washington Post wrote that the film may be the nastiest, cruelest fun you can have without actually having to study law or gird leather products. If movies were food, Heather's would be a cynic's chocolate binge. Roger Ebert, whoever that is, gave the film 2.5 stars out of 4 and wrote that the film is a morbid comedy about peer pressure in high school, about teenage suicide, and about the deadliness of cliques that not only exclude, but also maim and kill. So Big D, Ash, we always ask the question, where were you and what are your memories of Heather's?
So I was 16 years old at the time. I was a hefty boy, let's just say, in high school. I was trying to find myself. I had yet sprouted up to 6'7" that I am now. So generally, I tried to steer away from high school movies about cool kids, because the cool kids had girlfriends. They were out there, partying. They were having fun. Anytime I watched a high school movie, I realized I was Martha Dumptruck. That was me. So I steered instead towards sci-fi, horror, action, to basically escape my teenage angst. So I did not see this in high school because it would have been probably too painful. But I saw it sometimes after that when I became a little bit cooler. And it honestly became one of my favorite dark comedies of all time.
Yeah, I mean, this also has been a favorite of mine for a very long time. I saw Heather's for the first time when I was 13, so it was 1996. And life by that point already was not easy for me in school. I was already being really bullied. I was depressed because my parents didn't believe me and it kept happening. And I just became your typical teenager who was super angry kind of as a result of that. And so kind of in those 2 years of middle school, I had these awakenings. The first was kind of music. Somebody the year before I saw Heather's had given me copies of Smashing Pumpkins, their albums Gish and Siamese Dream, and they totally changed my life because I felt seen for the first time when I heard them, and I realized that there were people out there as dark as I felt, and so that did it with music. And then the very next year, we were on an academic games field trip in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and somebody said, "Let's watch Heather's," and I said, "Okay," and we watched it, and again, I felt utterly seen for the second time, I guess. I felt like I wasn't alone because there were people that were as cynical as I was becoming, because this movie kind of helped usher in baby cynic Ashley. And I've continued to love this movie up to becoming grown-up nihilist Ashley. And because of that, it's still really, really important to me. And I absolutely love this movie.
Well, now I feel like a fraud, Ash, because I it was like the opposite for me, right? Like I wanted to fit into a clique in high school. And, every clique, no matter how loosely arranged the rules are, it has its own requirements and it has its own cultural touchstones, right? So to be goth, which I desperately wanted to be in the 90s, there was a required curriculum. So you had to listen to The Cure and Joy Division and Sisters of Mercy, and you had to watch A Clockwork Orange and The Lost Boys, and of course, Heather's. So my first time watching it, I rented it from the cult classic section of Video Paradise because I knew I was supposed to watch it. And I didn't get it. Like I hadn't experienced high school yet or felt lust for a woman or felt any angst in the world. So it was like watching an educational film. I'm like, okay, I got to wear that and say that and do that. And upon a rewatch in my college years, I finally got like, oh, these are all the dark themes. These are the power struggles. This is the bizarre sexuality of it. And the satire like made more sense to me then. I didn't realize until I was in college that JD wasn't cool. Like I thought like, oh, that's what a cool guy does.
So now we found what the required viewing was, for your goth starter kit.
Right.
Where could I pick up the rest of my goth starter kit? Would it be Hot Topics? Where did you go?
I mean, at the time, I don't think I even knew what Hot Topic was. Remember, I didn't have a car. Like I didn't have a way to get to the mall. So for us, it was all on bulletin board systems. You would link up with people on BBSs on your computer, and there would just be meetups places, In Arizona, it was often like the Taco Bell near Video Paradise. We'd all hang out on the patio of the Taco Bell a lot.
Was there a makeup board? Like how to do your...
Oh, absolutely. No, that was outside of Rocky Horror Picture Show in the alley. We would do each other's
I was just
makeup.
about to say that.
Gotcha.
But, Big D, kind of like you, like while everyone else was doing drugs and drinking and getting laid in this group, like for some reason, Gene was not invited to that part.
Mm-mm.
I would just stand around and wait for the theater to open up or wait for my burrito supreme.
And just brood in the corner thinking, see me.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Let's just get to the trailer, please.
I wanted to be a member of the most powerful clique in school.
Dear Diary, Heather said she teaches people real life.
You were nothing before you met me. You were a Girl Scout cookie.
Does it not bother you that everybody in this school thinks that you're Veronica? Like I give a shit.
Heather number one just looked right at me. You a Heather?
No, I'm a Veronica. I don't really like my friends.
I don't really like your friends either.
They're people I work with, and our job is being popular.
Maybe it's time to take a vacation.
I just killed my best friend.
And your worst enemy.
Same difference. My teen angst has a body count. This is a tragic thing.
Hallelujah.
We scare people into not being assholes. What did you say, dickhead?
I did not want them dead.
You did too.
Did not. Shut up.
I love my dead gay son.
You were out of control. That knife is filthy.
What do you think I'm gonna do with it? Take out her tonsils? Is this as good for you as it is for me?
Life can suck.
That's it. We're breaking up.
Veronica Sawyer is one of the popular girls at the fictional Westerberg High School in Sherwood, Ohio. She's part of a popular but feared clique that also consists of 3 other wealthy and beautiful girls: Heather Chandler, Heather Duke, and Heather McNamara. She has grown tired of them and longs to return to her old life with her nerdy friends. One day, new student and rebellious outsider Jason J.D. Dean pulls a gun and fires blanks on jocks Kurt Kelly and Ram Sweeney in response to them bullying him. Veronica observes this and finds herself fascinated.
So I have 2 theories about high school, like when we reflect back on it. One, I don't believe this old adage that, high school was terrible for everyone. I don't think that was true. For some people, I think high school was a great time. And for some people, it was a big highlight of their lives. And that leads me to my second belief, which is that if you are one of those people, I think there's a very good chance that you were part of what made high school really shitty for those other people that don't want to go back to it. So with that in mind, that brings me to like the Heathers. They are the queen bees in this movie, and they are repetitive. You see them over and over again in the teen films that come out. I mean, Regina George and Mean Girls, I mean, she is Heather Chandler made over. And when you see it open up, they're these beautiful girls. They're sitting there. They've got these pretty smiles. They're all prim and proper. And then they stand up and they trample those flowers. And it's such a great, iconic kind of opening and introduction to this idea that they're going to trample everything that's in their way, all the people. And I think it's a really fantastic introduction to who these 3 are and what this movie we're about to see about these girls is going to kind of be.
So now I don't know if this is because of the HD boom, that everybody now has high definition in their house, and I'm not sitting in a theater watching a standard version. But I could not get over the fact that in 80s and 90s, Hollywood teeth, anything went. It was, you could show up like with summer teeth. You're missing some are here, some aren't. It didn't matter. And we've discussed, I think it was Ben Affleck. He's got those tiny little like chiclet teeth in the beginning of his career to where when he got the role for Armageddon, part of his contract was they said, hey, we're going to pay to fix your teeth. So maybe in the late 90s, it started to change. But when we see Shannen Doherty and she smiles, it is jacked up. I thought she has some extra teeth in there because her smile and her teeth were so bad. I said, oh, wow. Are they making a comment about the fact that she's bulimic? Or is it that just in the 80s, anything went?
I wonder if that was like an inside thing in the studio. They're like, don't tell her, but we need somebody who looks like they might have an eating disorder. So let's mess their teeth up. Ash, I just realized we hit a touchstone for you. And I can see it in your face now. The discussion of bulimia. Tell us about it, Ash.
So bulimia, no, I don't think that's what it is at all. I mean, if you watch her in 90210, she looks exactly the same. And I'll be very honest, I've never understood the Shannen Doherty kind of obsession. I think that she always has looked the same. And I think she's not that great of an actress. I mean, I'm fine with her teeth, but it's not just for this movie, guys. That's genuinely, I think, I mean, she still looks like that today. So.
Big D, I'm surprised you were hung up on the teeth because her eyes are offset. Her eyes are offset by about 5 degrees. It's a known thing. Like, it's kind of a trademark thing. And I kind of appreciate that when we talk about the nostalgia we have toward these movies, that in the 80s and 90s, they didn't necessarily have a lot of racial diversity on screen, but they definitely allowed a broader spectrum of attractiveness on screen. Also, like, if you watch like MTV, like music videos from the 80s, you're like, that guy? Okay. Rick Ocasek? Sure.
You're totally right. And Ashley, as a parent, will attest to this. If you ever look at Elsa or any of the Disney characters, their eyes are gigantic and off to the side. Somebody did a rendering of what the characters would look like proportionally if you blew them up to human size. It is scary. It is Shannen Doherty. She looks like those the teenage dolls, the brats. That is Shannen Doherty.
Now, Ash, you mentioned the trampling of the flowers as they move from their picturesque scene where the Heathers are all sitting. And I want to point out that in most high school movies, normally in the build up to the opening scenes, you've got like kids doing kid things, right? We're getting ready to go to camp. We're, hopping in the car to go to school. I'm running late to class. I got to catch the bus. In this case, we got kids playing croquet. And it seems like a throwaway scene, but it sets the tone for the entire movie. There's this fantasy setting of extreme privilege and these careless, malevolent signals to the audience that the whole movie is going to be surreal. You have to know from this scene that anything else you see in the rest of the movie should not be taken seriously. Everything is going to get pushed to the limits, like, wearing a diary monocle or something like that. You have to understand this croquet scene is everything. If you just got to the theater late, then the rest of the movie doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I owned a diary monocle after this movie came out because I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. But their fashion in that croquet scene is enough to make it worthwhile. And that goes for the girls and for JD, because JD is introduced in this part of the movie and his look is so iconic. And Christian Slater, he truly, young Christian Slater was just something to behold. And I thought it was really interesting in researching for this movie. I found out that a lot of people actually auditioned for that role. And the one that got closest to beating Slater out was actually Brad Pitt. But when they did a screen test with him, they just kept saying he's too nice. The way he interacted with the cast, he just looks too nice. He's too pretty. And that's when they got Slater. And they liked the fact that he reminded them so much of like a young Jack Nicholson in this role. And he really looks like it. He looks almost at times like he's doing an impersonation of Jack Nicholson. But from his hair to his clothes, I just thought at 13 years old that he was the hottest thing that I had ever seen. And I was hoping that maybe I had matured some at the age of 37 upon watching this movie. And unfortunately, I haven't, because I also still thought that he was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful man.
No, Ash, don't feel guilty. I'm right there with you. I never understood the entire Christian Slater thing. Gleaming the Cube, he's an idiot. What's that pirate radio movie where he's like, underground radio?
Volume.
Okay, so in all of those, he's like, he's an annoying high school dude. But with this movie, I see why, Ashley, you put the Teen Beat photos all over your wall. It makes sense. I wish I was with him. I wanted him to invite me into the middle of a lake somewhere with a bottle of tequila, his sax, and some Bach. I would be his boy. I'd be his ride or die with him.
See, I don't think he had matured yet. He was White Dog poured into a barrel at this point. He wasn't quite bourbon. For me, Christian Slater doesn't hit it until like True Romance. That's where he's like super fucking hot. And this, he was like kind of herky-jerky, just unpolished.
No, that little gold earring. His little trench that sweeps the ground. He was fully baked by this point. I'll have to totally disagree with you there. I will say, though, that when we are introduced to him, we have that first shocking moment, which is when he pulls the gun with the blanks in the middle of the cafeteria. And that is when I kind of woke up for a second in watching this movie, because it kind of aged the movie a ton. In 2020, after everything that has happened kind of post-Columbine in 99, like, we would not be able to get away with that in a film now, like a gag of a unpopular kid pulling a gun and shooting the popular kids. Like, that wouldn't be allowed today. And so that was a little interesting for me to kind of realize that this was an era that is so very different with what we have with being able to be portrayed about schools today in kind of 2020.
So Ashley, we recently did Clueless. Mm-hmm. And watching this movie, I have a better understanding of what Clueless was able to achieve. Because in this, they're making a satire of high school. And usually movies will only pick on one or 2 points. Here, it is savage across the board. This movie is incredibly balanced. It attacks everyone. There is nobody that escapes this. No group, no part of 80s life. It takes a flamethrower to everything that I grew up with. The cool kids, you got the athletes, the popular girls, how they interact, the popular guys, the nerds, the college students, the teachers, the parents, the press, popular culture as a whole, with, people getting around the cause and like hands across America, religion and the church. No one escapes this movie unscathed. And I think that a lot of what goes on in the movie didn't shock me because it is universal. They are not selective in who they attack. So no matter how hard or how harsh or out of line some of the things that happen or the dialogue, I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's do it, because everybody's getting burned.
And not only is the lampooning universal big D, but like the language doesn't hold back either. I gasped a couple of times. There's a point where they're talking about writing that note and Heather says, yeah, some real shower nozzle masturbation material. And I was like, whoa. And what I love about it is we've seen shit like Porky's, which is far more pornographic and crass, but it was unintelligent and didn't have anything to say. And so you see that and it just kind of whizzes right by your head. But in this case, you're like, you take a pause and you're like, wow, there's actually some smarts behind this. And I think no one can deny that this movie is infinitely quotable because of how rough and crass the language is.
Yeah, and I think that the students, though, they do seem as ridiculous and farcical as they are. There is something that's grounded about each of the characters. They react and say things in a way that you could see some of the typical cliche students. They're doing like a survey, a poll. I think it's for the newspaper. So they go around asking, if you inherited $5 million the same day that aliens land on the Earth, and they say they're going to blow it up in 2 days, what do you do? So the students in the movie, they give a variety of answers. All of them show the spectrum of high school students. One girl who says, yeah, I'd give all the money to the homeless, every cent of it. Then this pompous, rich white kid says, I'd give it to my dad. He's the best broker in the state. Somebody then says, I'd use it for a good world get together for everybody to party. Then the meathead football player goes, oh, you know what? I'd pay Madonna to sit on my face and ride me like the Kentucky Derby. Some weird like outlier from the corner table in the lunchroom says, I'd go to the zoo, get a lion, put a remote control bomb up his butt, and then hit the bomb to go off so we die together as one. These are all interesting answers. So you don't have to pick one of these. I want to know what you two would do if you had $5 million and you knew the world was going to end in 2 days.
So of those choices, I was like, yeah, I would give it to the homeless or whatever, until I heard about Madonna sitting on your face. And I was like, 88 Madonna? $1 million? Yeah, probably go for it. But I think it's got to be a trick question. See, I overthink these things. So I'd be like, listen, if there's 2 days left and everybody knows we're going to die, money's worthless. Who gives a shit about $5 million? Like, nobody's going to take your money to do a job. Everyone's going to be off the job. But assuming that I was the only person who knew that the aliens were coming and I couldn't tell anyone, I'd have a wedding, dude. I'd get married.
Oh, nice.
You have to wait till the end of the world to get married?
No, I was saying if I had 2 days to live and $5 million, I'd throw a badass wedding. If I couldn't tell everyone else, run for your lives.
That would just push his timeline up by like 6 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. Like, I agree with you, Gene. Like, that's the first thing I thought too, is that like, well, what are you going to do with $5 million? Like, nothing's going to be open. You're not going to be able to fly anywhere. So I think I just do what I always do. We'd eat velvet tacos, which is the best tacos ever, hang out with Tom and the kids. And I've always, if there's an apocalypse, I want to go out Melancholia style. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie where they just calmly sit with that symphonic music while the world explodes around them. I think that's pretty badass. So I'd be down for that.
So 1988, Big D would be Madonna. I agree.
Yeah.
But today, it's simple. And it's going to sound, I hope it doesn't sound cheesy, but today I would hire 15 private jets to go every corner of the earth and get every living family relative that I have to fly back to one place and have a kick-ass party. We're all going to sit out there in the field with some tents, everybody be together. So when the aliens blow up the world, we're all there together.
I mean, I think we're on the same page then.
Yeah.
We're getting everybody together for my wedding and we're going to have a big party. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Well, Veronica attends a frat party with Heather Chandler. After refusing to have sex with a frat brother and vomiting on Heather Chandler vows to destroy Veronica's reputation. JD shows up at Veronica's house and they end up having sex outside. They express to each other their mutual hatred of Chandler's tyranny. The next morning, Veronica and JD break into Heather Chandler's house. JD jokingly puts drain cleaner in a mug with the intention of giving it to Heather Chandler, but Veronica quickly shuts him down. She mixes orange juice and milk together instead as an attempt to make her throw up and get revenge. But Veronica gets the cups mixed up. JD notices this and hands Heather Chandler the mug with the drain cleaner. She drinks it, crashes through a glass table, and dies. Veronica panics, but JD urges her to forge a dramatic suicide note in Heather Chandler's handwriting. The school and community look on Chandler's apparent suicide as a tragic decision made by a troubled teenager, making her more worshipped in death than in life. Heather Duke soon steps into the role of clique leader and begins wearing a red scrunchie that had belonged to Heather Chandler.
So Heather Chandler goes out in an absolutely amazing way in this scene when she crashes through that table. But what I think is so smart about Heather's is that they are a teen movie that's aware enough to know that like the bad guys, quote unquote, in high school are a lot more complex than just being bad, that everybody's got problems. And so there's that moment where after she's kind of forced into going down on this guy, she spits the water out on the mirror, like on her reflection. I mean, I think that's a really powerful moment in this movie. And, you know, she's popular, but Veronica, who had just said earlier, you know, that being popular is a job, that she's not happy, you know, she's just as miserable as the rest of us. And I found a lot of solace in that the popular girls that were making my life hell, that maybe they weren't quite as happy as I thought they were. I think this movie is really smart because not a lot of teen movies explored that up until this point.
And Ashley, I totally agree with you. She's self-loathing. She hates herself for what she's doing. And I'm going to disagree with something you said earlier. I don't think the popular kids were the truly happy ones. I had a friend that I went to high school with. His name was, I just want to say Dave. I don't want to give his last name. He was that hippie, hammock in the tree at lunch, the kid who wore the crazy mismatched pants, went to prom in a purple tux. That dude was happy because he just didn't give a fuck. The popular kids, they're not all happy. They're not. They're miserable in some small way. It might not be the same thing that I was, sitting home self-loathing, but Veronica doesn't seem to fit in this group. I understand she's part of the popular clique, but in order to be part of the popular clique, you got to kind of drink the Heather Kool-Aid. You got to toe the line. You got to support the other Heathers. Veronica's in open rebellion. Why is she part of the group when she's clearly trying to undermine them?
I don't know. I think it's kind of insinuated that she's with them because life is easier in some sense if you're not at the end of the bullying. If you're the one doing the bullying, you know, is that easier than you being on the end of like receiving that bullying? But she's obviously conflicted about it. But I also think, when we'll get into it later, I think that's also what makes her character really complex too, is that she's not like some traditional hero that's like the good guy who's coming in to save the unpopular kids. Because she writes the letter to Martha. I mean, she does that. She's an active participant in writing that letter. So, you know, she's not some saint for sure.
Now, Ash, you mentioned in that scene where Heather C is like looking at herself in the mirror and she kind of spits the water up after giving the college dude a blowjob. And I understood that she had self-loathing, but I didn't understand why she did it. Like, she's the most popular girl in school. Why is she giving this guy? And she clearly was trying to set limits with this dude, but then she ends up going down on him anyway. And I was watching the scene going like, why? Why would you do that?
Well, I think it's because she's out of her element there. She's at a university. It's these college guys. So she may be the most popular, like in her little pond at her little place, but she's not there. And I think that she's terrified about what he'll say. Will he call her frigid? Will he call her a prude? You know, will he make fun of her? Because that will ruin her reputation. And sex comes with that. When you're a hot girl, a lot of times things are expected of you. And I think she wants, so the same reason you see later with Heather M, why she gets into the situation she gets into with cow tipping. And I think it's just an unfortunate piece of that. And y'all, this is the 80s. Like, people didn't talk about this stuff in movies in the 80s. Like, it was all very much just implied, because there's a lot of like assault that goes on against these women, the Heathers and Veronica. 4 different times dudes try to sexually assault Veronica, JD being one of them. And I think it's really smart, because that's what happens in real life. Nobody talks about it after the fact. And I think that that's a really, when we see that with Heather Chandler, that's the most vulnerable she is, that makes you go, wow, she's a bitch, but she's also like a really complicated, sad girl. So
yeah, I found myself questioning, how did this not spawn like this rash of copycats? Because it is the perfect recipe if you want to inspire like the would-be shooters. You pick some popular actors at the time. You got Christian Slater and Winona Ryder. Their characters represent the group of kids who are most likely to identify with the shooter or to be a shooter. And you show them what their life would look like if they could rain down judgment on the kids around them who've wronged them. So famously after this, Columbine happened. And I was just happened to listen recently, and this is a podcast I'm going to plug. I don't plug podcasts that much, but Time Suck with Dan Cummins. This dude is hilarious. He'll go back and he'll look at a topic. And he does a really great job. So he brought up the fact in this week's episode about Columbine that when the 2 seniors, Dylan and Eric, went back and shot up the school, they killed 12 students, a teacher, they injured 20-something other students before they shot and killed themselves. Everybody put out this narrative, oh, these poor kids, they were being bullied. The jocks, it's the music that made them do it. It was Marilyn Manson. It's bullshit. These 2 kids weren't misfits. These 2 kids were semi-popular. One of the kids went to the prom. Another kid the night of the prom was at a girl's house. They had a group of friends. And I'm surprised more people didn't actually do it.
I think it's 2 things. One, Big D, great observation on the blaming on Marilyn Manson. Because even in this movie, back in 88, what does the pastor say? He's like, oh, it's that MTV video games that's making them do it, But I think 2 factors. One is nobody saw this movie. So that probably had something to do with it. It made $1 million, whatever. But the other one is often the kids that are the misfits and the weirdos, they're so sensitive that killing other people would still seem like an abhorrent act to them. They're not sociopaths, right? And so their sensitivity precludes them from doing such things, and their vulnerability precludes them from having the initiative to do that sort of a thing. And so I think there is a misnomer there that any kid push their limit is going to react this way. I don't think that's it at all. I think a lot of us, as evidenced in this podcast, felt very isolated and alone in high school, but still just listened to really sad music and wrote poetry.
Yeah. And I think it's all about perception too, because you're talking about, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. I think if you would ask them, I don't think they would have classified themselves as popular. And I think that that's one of the most dangerous things that happens in high school is what your kind of classification becomes and how little control you have over that these other groups classify you as something. And this rumor mill that it kind of labels people for at least the length of time that they're in high school, if not, if it doesn't follow them around afterwards. I mean, New Orleans, where I was, it's a big city, but it's not. It's a really fucking small town. And so shit follows people even after high school. And that's why this threat that Heather C makes to Veronica in the scene where she says, you're done. You can go to Eisenhower. You can go to this school, but like, you're done. You're burned. That's a real fucking threat for Veronica. And it's a murderous threat, right? That she's this heinous human and, she wants to kill her reputation. And so what a smart way for the movie to play that. So JD defends her by actually killing the source of that information, right?
Yeah, and I think the movie does a great job of laying the groundwork early on for when the second half of this movie goes fucking bonkers. They do these little subtle foreshadowing tricks that I didn't even pick up on when I'm first watching the movie. Normally you can see when they introduce something that you're like, oh, okay, we're going to come back to that later on. They're Chekhov's gun, but they early on establish that Veronica can forge people's signatures in the notes. So later on, when she's writing a note, I'm like, oh, okay, great. She's got that skill. When JD turns into a psychopath, spoiler alert, that tries to blow up the gymnasium, I'm like, wow, his dad's got a construction company. He likes to blow up trees with fireworks. He'll put a Norwegian in the boiler room. He knows how to take care of problems with violence. All this groundwork helps me think that Westerberg High School, shit goes crazy, but it's plausible. And then later on, when Kurt is being chased after he's trying to have a sword fight and DJ catches him, I noticed he's got an ace bandage wrapped around his knee. They even thought about the fact of somebody calling bullshit that this stoner bad boy biker, how's he going to catch the star on the football team?
I literally was watching that scene as he's chasing him through the woods. I'm like, how the fuck is he going to catch him? And then I'm like, oh shit, his knee is bandaged. It's a perfect detail. Yeah. And other details that I loved about this movie was there was a literary detail in Heather C's room. JD's looking around the room and he sees Sylvia Plath on the floor and he's like, oh, suicide. And what's great about it is because it's Heather C, it's not even Sylvia Plath. It's fucking Cliff's Notes of Sylvia Plath, which is fantastic. You know, and you see Moby Dick and you know that Heather D is looking to take over Heather C's spot. It is her white whale. It's fantastically smart.
Yeah, I mean, they take that even one step further when they're going through Heather C's locker and she has a copy of Harold Voth's The Castrated Family, which is all about this psychiatrist in the 70s who wrote about the problems with the nuclear family and power structures and how the patriarchy should remain and the roles that women should play in power structures. And like, it's this really brilliant, you know, thing for Heather C to randomly have in her locker.
Well, Heather McNamara convinces Veronica to go with her, Kurt, and Ram on a double date, during which the boys end up drunk and passing out in cow manure. The following day, they spread a false rumor about Veronica blowing both of them and ruining her reputation. JD proposes that she lure them into the woods with a promise to make the rumors true, then shoot them with non-fatal bullets. JD shoots and kills Ram, but Veronica misses Kurt, who runs away. JD chases Kurt back toward Veronica, who finally shoots him. JD plants material next to the boys, implying that they were gay, and a note stating that the two were lovers participating in a suicide pact. Veronica then realizes the bullets were real. At their funeral, the boys are made into martyrs against homophobia.
So here we start getting to some cinematic 80s gold. I love the internal monologue while everyone is saying their final goodbye at the casket. It is so wrong. But it is so fucking funny. I'm sorry. I'm going to embrace the satirical aspect of this movie. You get Ram, who goes up there. Jesus, God in heaven. Why'd you have to kill such hot ass? Hey, I was joking. Jesus, man. Okay, don't be so serious. Come on. You know, you get Heather Duke, who's saying, you know, I prayed for her death many times. You get Veronica saying, I'm sorry. You know, technically, I know I killed her. But I find myself now, to this day, and even at my uncle's funeral 2 weeks ago, I find myself thinking, what are people really thinking?
It's fucking bonkers, Big D, how much your mind can wander at a funeral. It's like the most inopportune time and your brain goes all over the place.
I even found myself self-editing as I was saying mine, as if somebody could hear it. I was like, I better think this one out before I get up there. I think I was just being safe.
Yeah, I love the internal monologue. I also loved watching JD and Veronica compose some of these notes. Like as a writer, and Ash, I'm sure you can identify with this, like those composition scenes were gold for me. Like Heather's suicide note, you know, as they're writing it, and Veronica in this bit of foreshadowing is like, that's good. Have you done this before? Or when they start talking about the use of myriad, which I immediately picked up on, and just how that's a running gag for like the next 5 minutes. So we're baited into thinking the killing spree is fun because of the joy that these two are taking in writing these suicide notes, right? So the movie is lulling you into the sense that this is a party, that the good times are never going to end, right? And Ram and Kurt's suicide note was intended to play on these mainstream misconceptions of gay love. Like JD and Veronica aren't just making fun of Ram and Kurt, but they're also laughing at society at large because they know someone's going to find this note and all the fallout from that. And what's great is later in the movie, you have a girl just flat out say the societal conception of what happened. Kurt and Ram killed themselves in a repressed homicidal suicide pact. It's perfect.
You know, and I think of myself, I'm 40 years old. I'm a father. I think I've evolved. I've grown up since I was young. You know, it's 2020. I have a kind of more inclusive view of the world. And I've found myself laughing at some shit that I know is wrong, especially Kurt and Ram. But fuck it, I don't care. I can't help myself, okay? I don't want to feel guilty about this, and I don't think I should. So I read an article where Michael Lehman, who was the director, and the writer, Daniel Waters, they said they always knew that viewers would be offended and that it would be provocative. But part of why you do satire is to rile people up a bit. You want them to look at things differently. So they weren't bothered that people were offended. It was their object to get people talking about it. So some of the things that happen here, I found myself laughing and I don't feel guilty. The one that is burned in my head is Kurt's dad. He gets up there, he says, "If there's any way you can hear me, Kurt, buddy, I don't care. I don't care if you were some pansy. You're my own flesh and blood. You made me proud. My son's a homosexual. I love him. I love my dead gay son. Oh, I love my dead gay son." I know I shouldn't be laughing, but since everybody's getting burned, I'm laughing. When you get Kurt and Ram earlier, they're bullying another kid. And he says, "Oh, yeah, say you like big dicks." And he's holding him down. The guy is mocking them back, but he's not getting them. Like, "Oh, yeah, oh, I like to suck big cocks." I found myself laughing, and I can't help it because the movie immediately acknowledges that Kurt and Ram and their characters and the type of kids they were in high school, they're only good for two things: date rape and AIDS jokes.
I think it's similar to the discussion we had about Clueless, because there was a lot in Clueless that I think you were worried to find funny because you thought that it might be offensive or problematic. But I think the satire, when it's kind of caressed by this brilliant satire around it, like it makes it just comes across differently. Although I have to say, this was the part of the movie I did not understand when I was 13 years old, was the mineral water. I thought it was clearly Canadian. Do you guys remember Clearly Canadian, the sparkling water? Canadian. Right. And every time I drank those after this, I was like, is this a gay thing? Like, I totally didn't understand that when I was a kid. But I think all of that is really funny. And I think it still plays really well even today. Like, I think that kind of satirical gag today would work just the same in a script like this one.
Yeah, Big D, I can't speak for the gay community, but as far as being gay adjacent, I can say that they're not the butt of the joke here. The butt of the joke is people who don't understand what being gay even is. They're like, what should we put in this bag? Gay artifacts, right? And it's like, you want like a smut magazine. And again, as you said, Ash, the sparkling water, and the note. And then, of course, the eulogy, which is supposed to be acceptance in and of itself, is making fun of everybody who survived this suicide. Even the guy who's saying like, I love dicks, I can't get enough. He's making fun of Kurt, and Kurt doesn't even get it. That like, oh, is that what you want me to say? Is that what a gay person would say? I love dicks and I can't get enough. It's great.
God, what makes it even better is that as ridiculous as this, the gay artifacts is, it works like a charm. We see the campus police. He's like, "Oh, get back here. I got this. Case solved. Case solved." Takes 2 minutes.
Well, and the fact that it's in a gift bag with a big like camellia on it, like, I mean, it's pretty fantastic. But this is also though where the tone of the movie, as funny as the funeral is, the tone of the movie kind of takes a more ominous, turn, because the scene where they're chasing down Ram and Kurt, that's actually a really dark scene because you realize these two kids are being murdered. And I think what's really interesting is they made all these really great film choices where the color palette of the film actually begins to change in this part of the movie. Because up until this point, we've been really dependent on this very stark color scheme where, red is the HBIC, Heather Chandler, she's got, the power. I mean, just think about the fact that presidential candidates, they wear red when it's war and they wear blue when it's peace. I mean, red is the super powerful color. And you've got Heather M, who's cheery. So she's yellow like the Hufflepuffs in Harry Potter. You've got green, which represents envy, which obviously is Heather D because she's super jelly of Heather C. And then Veronica's constantly cast in this blue light. But throughout this part of the movie, her blues start to fade into dark purples and more toward the blacks that JD represents. And even the palette of the cinematography starkly changes. It becomes really overcast and gray and blues. And I think that that's a really interesting thing because it guides us through where the jokes are supposed to stop. They show us that this is funny and satirical, but this is not because it's dark and it's scary. And they really do a good job visually of kind of leading us through that. But I do think, though, that one of the funnier scenes is in this part of the movie, which is the love-in that Miss Fleming has. I think that in general, high school teachers are kind of like, it's a performative art they're putting on for the kids to try to get them engaged and to talk about their feelings and safe spaces and how important that is. But the irony of it is that a lot of the times these quote unquote moments of healing they're creating that the teachers think are so effective actually wind up being kind of useless and almost more painful for students. I know we've talked about Columbine already, but that's what brought to mind for me. That was the tragic thing that happened when I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school when Columbine happened. And the day afterwards, when we got back to school, the teachers in every class, I guess they talked about it in a fucking, faculty meeting, they made us all sit in the shape of a cross in every classroom.
No.
I swear to you. And
Was this a
so
private
no
school,
matter,
like a Catholic school?
no, it was a public school. But it's New Orleans. I mean, everybody's Catholic in New Orleans, but they made it so like they had all the desks arranged in these cross shapes. And so they made us sit in them at my math class, my science class, every single class. We sat in cross shapes, and the teachers, were like, well, tell us about how you feel. Do you feel you're going to be killed? What would you say in your last moments? And it was so frightening for me at 14 years old, because already I'm dealing with the fact that people died at school, because that was the first time it happened, right? These shootings. And I'm going, why the fuck am I sitting in a cross right now? Like, this does not comfort me. I don't pray. Like, this is uncomfortable for me. And I think that The Love-In is a brilliant example of that. And it's so hilarious because that couple with Big Fun coming out, teenage suicide, don't do it. Yeah. I mean, it's just these adults thinking they know what kids need. And I love The Love-In for that reason, because it's ridiculous and absolutely accurate.
I think you're right. I think it's ridiculous that so many people see these tragedies as an opportunity to get out in front, to whatever, advance their career. I dealt with it, and I know I mentioned it on earlier podcasts. My high school was kind of in the back. You had to take this little windy road, and on the corner was a motel with high hedges. One of the girls in my high school, I might have been a freshman, she was like a junior, she would cut through, we would all do it, you'd cut through the parking lot. Some dude grabbed her, raped her, and murdered her. So our school went through this. So they had everybody in the auditorium, and everybody was holding hands and saying prayers, and everyone was together, and news crews were there. And all of a sudden, like, this girl she was a normal girl. She was Betty, let's just say. But on TV, oh, I loved her. She was my best friend. Oh, this was great. I'm like, why are you doing this? The school almost took it as an opportunity to show how, we're prepared to deal with the needs of our students. But it's sad. It becomes an opportunity for people just to get out in front and less about the person who died.
I'm so glad you guys brought this up, because to me, like, the real tragedy of a child dying is that they never fully became a person, right? There's nothing to eulogize because they never even develop beyond being what every kid is. And I always thought this, again, going back to my high school days, that these eulogies for high schoolers, they're always so bizarre and fluffed up. We had a couple kids that died during lunch break, right? They went out there rushing to get back to class on time. They got in a car accident. They died. Suddenly, everybody knew them and everybody loved them. They were nobodies prior to this. And, they act like this kid like achieved something or had a full life. And then all the kids, like you said, Ash, they're just expected to react emotionally when you had no idea who this person was. And you just want to go home and watch MTV, right? They're trying to build importance out of nothing. And the fact that Heather's picks up on this, again, back in 88, try to take yourselves back to this time and other movies that were out in 88. It is wonderfully intelligent. Although she keeps dating JD, Veronica is increasingly disturbed by his behavior. Martha Dunstock, an obese student, pins a suicide note to her chest and walks into traffic. She survives but is badly injured, and she is mocked for trying to act like the popular kids. Heather McNamara calls a radio show one night while Veronica and Duke are listening and talks of depression in her life. The next day, Heather Duke tells the entire school about the radio call. McNamara attempts to take her life by overdosing in the girls' bathroom, but she is saved by Veronica. She tells JD that she will not participate in any more killings, and JD blackmails Heather Duke into getting everyone to sign a petition that, unbeknownst to her, is intended to act as a mass suicide note.
So by this point in the movie, they've addressed a lot of different kind of teenage topics. There's suicide, bulimia, date rape, homosexuality, religion, hypocrisy, cynicism, sex, murder. It's all kind of tackled, but it doesn't feel like an after-school special. And I think by this point of the movie, it's clear that that is exactly what they're parodying here. They're parodying the fact of, like, in the 80s, that's when these after-school specials started, right? So it's, coming on and telling you not to have sex before marriage because then you'll, die of chlamydia or whatever, right? And then, you have, don't do drugs because then you'll end up on the street. And they're so ridiculous because kids are a lot more complex than you think they are.
And I think this leads to one of the most honest takes of this movie. When the parents who usually seem oblivious, they're sitting out in the patio talking about pate and about why the dad's doing stupid things. Veronica's in there complaining about high school, and the mother looks at her. And it's almost like the camera comes on her, and it's a moment of clarity where the mom is going to talk to us. She said, you know what? Usually when teenagers are complaining about wanting to be treated like human beings, it's because they usually are being treated like human beings at that. How do you think adults act? High school is just a microcosm of the real world. The cliques don't end. The sadness and the wandering feeling trying to find yourself doesn't end. So shut up and stop whining. And I thought it was a true, honest take that in the end helps Veronica get to the next step.
Well, maybe that's why this part of the movie starts to feel frenetic, because there is no answer. There's no way to end of like, how do we help people feel better? And the movie starts to feel almost really surreal in parts at this point. And I have always been confused by that because it feels like a total, shift in tone. And I found what I think may be an answer to why the tone shifts so drastically. And I think it's because it was intentional. So originally, the writer of Heather's wrote a 3-hour movie script. So the original script was supposed to be 3 hours long because they wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct it. They said, okay, he's done his space movie with 2001. He's done his horror movie with The Shining. Heather's is going to be his teen film. And I think that makes a lot of sense because a lot of this feels very Kubrick-esque. And also maybe that's why JD toward the end, he kept reminding me of Jack Torrance, like a high school age Jack Torrance from The Shining.
Well, Ash, this is why I listen to Shat the Movies, because you just fucking cracked the case for me. I was wondering why most of what happens after JD turns heel, after he seems really evil, when he shoots the stereo, when he forces himself on Veronica, everything after that just felt plodding and not entertaining. And I feel the same way about most Kubrick movies, right? There's a bunch of fun, and then they sort of lose their way for a bit. I mean, think of like The Shining, or a great example is Full Metal Jacket, right? First half is great. I will sit down anytime with anyone, kick back a couple drinks, watch the first half of Full Metal Jacket, laugh my ass off. And then suddenly, snap. I don't want to spoil things, but it gets dark in a hurry. And the last half is not as fun to watch. I think that's what's going on here. I'm just not sure Heather's was as successful at pulling it off, probably because it didn't have Stanley Kubrick.
I totally agree.
Well, Veronica has a nightmare where JD kills Heather Duke, and she sees the undead Heather Chandler at the funeral. Veronica wakes up and writes what appears to be a suicide note in her diary, then stages a hanging with a hidden harness around her waist to support her weight for JD to see as he climbs into her room with a revolver. Assuming she's dead, JD rambles about his intent to kill her had she not committed suicide, and his plan to blow up the school during a pep rally. Veronica reveals to her mother that she is not dead, and at school the next day, she confronts JD in the boiler room while he is planting dynamite. Veronica shoots JD when he refuses to stop the bombing, and as JD collapses, his switchblade cuts the wires to the detonator, and it stops. Veronica walks out through the pep rally while everyone is cheering, and the severely injured JD follows her outside with a bomb strapped to his chest, offers a personal eulogy, and detonates the bomb. Veronica confronts Heather Duke, takes the red scrunchie, and vows to change the way things are. She then invites Martha to hang out on prom night and watch movies with her, heading down the hallway while Duke watches. So, guys, I think that the difference between good movies and great ones is pacing and purpose. And this whole Heather Duke funeral nightmare thing, it lacked both for me. The movie starts to fall apart at this point for me. I felt like I was watching an outtake from Beetlejuice, complete with Otho, and getting me to that faux Veronica suicide sooner, I think would have had more impact and also just made for a tighter film.
I 1,000% agree with you. The movie's running. It's a downhill. You're in like a car in neutral going down a steep hill. You're like, holy shit, this is going to go off the rails. And then all of a sudden it just sputters out and hits like a flat patch. I agreed. Why are you having the dream sequence? Why are we seeing the funeral again? Why? I wanted them to, instead of having this turn to heel, they should have gone Bonnie and Clyde and ride or die to the end. I would have rather had that. But instead, the plot, it just sputters. It becomes messy. It grinds to a halt. Instead of building up to that final conflict in the school, instead of being like, holy shit, what's going to happen? I found myself being like, oh, what could have been? Let's just have this end.
Well, and I think that's what leaves ambiguous something that I don't think should be ambiguous at the end of this film, which is Veronica a good guy or not? Because up until this point, she's very much painted as our heroine, and the way that they cast her in the remainder of the film, it's almost like they give her a pass for that first half because, oh, she's the one who saves the school. Oh, she's the one that, kills JD, well, by just standing there and not helping him. She's the one who does this. So she's the hero, but I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think it leads to this kind of problematic thing that happens, which is a lot of people put themselves of one of two categories. They say in high school I was a Veronica, or in high school I was a Heather. And I don't think it's quite that simple, that dichotomy there, because one is not good and the other's bad. And I actually read a really interesting tweet a few months ago. Somebody tweeted out that all former Heathers grow up and think of themselves as Veronica. And I think that kind of sums up the issue here, because that's an interesting idea, because she was just as bad as JD. I mean, she did murder people. And if she didn't, quote unquote, know she was murdering people, she was at least aiding and abetting a murderer she knew was murdering people.
Yeah, JD comes out and says it when Veronica's pushing away from him. You believed it because you wanted to believe it, right? Veronica's not stupid. She is of above average intelligence. It's expressed throughout the movie. She wanted to kill. I think she just needed the smallest reason to alleviate her own guilt. I mean, he tells her we're going to use non-lethal Eek Luga rounds. And she's like, yeah, okay, that sounds right to me. Sees a guy shot through the throat and still fires her gun. She knows what she's doing.
Absolutely, she does. And as much as I'm saying that it is ambiguous as to whether or not Veronica is good or not, I do still really love the end of this movie. I think the scene where Christian Slater with JD, where the clock stops and he has to hit the clock, and she's got, Veronica's got the cigarette in her mouth and it gets lit by the explosion. It's fucking hilarious. I mean, it's great. And I think she's a badass in that scene, whether she's bad or good. But I did also find it interesting that there were two alternate endings. And I wanted to kind of talk about them because I think both would have been horrible ideas. The first was that the whole school blew up and everybody was equal on equal social footing at a prom in heaven.
No.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
What?
I like the blowing up part. No prom in heaven, though.
Right. But then they have a prom in heaven where everybody, is the same. And then the second was that JD blew himself up. She goes and she approaches Martha. And instead of Martha smiling and talking to her, she stabs Veronica, calls her Heather. And then Veronica's last line of the movie is, "My name's not Heather, you bitch," which I also think would have been pretty terrible. So with all of the, discussion about whether it's ambiguous, whether it's not paced as well, the ending we get, I think, is the best ending. And it's the one that captures this message about social structures and how difficult they are to change, and whether or not Veronica really can change anything by hanging out with Martha on prom night. Is that going to stop Heather Duke from wearing red? No. And I think the ending we get at least captures that message a lot better than a heaven prom and a stabbing by Martha.
So everyone knows that Big D was scarred by his new wave teen years. And when we watched Edward Scissorhands, I remember him being like, oh, bullshit, they're not going to go arrest him. They're just going to leave him alone. He's just going to be up there. And that's just okay, just because he thinks he's a little weird. And Gene, you're just going to identify with him because you think you're weird too. Yeah, Big D, right. I hope that you are more satisfied with this movie, because at the end of this movie, it does an important thing that I never noticed before this viewing, which is that pep rally scene when they kick it into slow motion. And you realize that over this time, as you're watching all these smiling faces and these stomping feet and people doing cartwheels, that the movie has completely flipped the student body from insufferable to uplifting. I wanted to hang out with the pep rally people. I didn't want to hang out with JD or Veronica. I wanted to be in that moment. And even the principal is there, spelling out the high school's name. I felt like it made a statement about it's okay to be mainstream, and there is a sort of community and unity in the high school that should be recognized and celebrated.
No, I think you just have to overlay "Smells Like Teen Spirit." Dun, 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 dun. That's what it was. It's probably where the idea came from. If that's true, I didn't read that.
Here we are now. Entertain us.
Yeah, exactly. Oh. So I think I have the definitive answer to whether Veronica's bad or good. She is bad. She is very, very, very bad. She's, theoretically, she's killed JD. All these bombs might go off in like a minute or two. oh, nobody can stop JD, the FBI, the police, the CIA, the PTA. How about you pull the fire alarm, Veronica? Get everybody out of the building. Don't go MacGyver. I don't care if you hit the middle button, the green wire, whatever. Don't try to defuse all these bombs. Just get out. Be the hero. But she's okay to put everybody's life at risk because then she might get some ironic ending.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't get that great scene where she comes out of the boiler room and she's just all beat to shit while everyone else is having a good time. I don't know. That made the movie for me. Well, now is the time in the podcast where we give our Shat score. Our Shat score tells you how many wipes it would take to get this movie off your bum. 5 wipes is an absolute mess of a movie, and 0 wipes is a perfect movie. Big D, we'll start with you. What is your wipe score for Heathers?
So as this movie's going on, the first half, I'm like, this is brilliant. I'm getting it. Ashley, my satirical eyes have opened. I'm understanding what's going on. And it was accomplishing the mission. It was making me uncomfortable with what I was laughing at. I was looking at the 80s and about high school differently. And it was hard to believe that this movie, it's 32 years old. But yet every topic and the way that they dealt with it, with the exception of, technology today, it was completely relevant. It felt as valid today as it was back then. But then the second half peters out. And I think they lost the momentum and they lost the ability to really make an impactful closing message that would have tied this up into something classic. So instead of that, I think it is a loss of an opportunity. Performances are good, enjoyable. I won't go back and watch it again just because I know I'll be disappointed. So I think it is a 2-wipe movie for me.
Ash, how about you?
So I, as I stated at the outset, absolutely loved this movie. And upon rewatch, I still really loved this movie. I have a real personal connection to it. But when I watched it for the review, for the pod, I tried to watch it with, more true and balanced eyes than not just the nostalgia glasses of what it was like to see this for the first time. And I found that the movie is still really fantastic for a lot of reasons that I think we've laid out here. I will argue that it, Clueless, and The Breakfast Club are the best teen films of all time. And I think that's going to be a hard standing to ever change. And, one thing we didn't talk about in this review is that they had a reboot of this as a television show. They did a Heather's television show, and it was like this real woke recasting with a body positive Heather Chandler. And it was, on paper, it looked like it might be good. And it was a disaster. It actually was an incredibly offensive show. It didn't have the fun that this had. And I think it's because movies like Heather's that were made in the time they were made, they're very difficult to recapture. And they harken back to a time that's much different than the one we have now. So I do think it's still incredible and deserves to be respected. But there are some things that I noticed on this rewatch. It's a little long. Gene, I think you did a really good job explaining a lot of the kind of clunkiness that happens toward the end of the film. I don't think they explore the nuances of Veronica enough. And because of those stumbles, it's still incredible, but Clueless is better paced, and I gave that a 0.5. And so because of that, I'm giving this one a solid 1.5.
All right, so 2 wipes from Big D, 1.5 wipes from Ash. Big D, I'm going to agree with you on the 2 wipes. I will forever love this movie, and I insist that everyone watch it. Like, the wipe score should not be an indicator of whether or not you should see a movie, but this is more a movie from which I would show select clips to people or like GIFs, right? Watch this section of Heather's, not necessarily the whole thing. And a lot of scenes stand on their own. They're so well written that they're really strong enough to just be held apart. But as a whole, the movie does drag. I think it's better than average, but it's just unpolished from an editing standpoint. I think the performances are great. Christian Slater, maybe not at his best, but you see a glimmer of what he'll be. And I think we did need one fewer Heather. I just don't know what McNamara was even doing there. She didn't really serve a purpose. So for me, it's 2 wipes. And with 2 wipes from me, 2 wipes from Big D, and 1.5 wipes from Ash, the average for Heather's is 1.83 repeating wipes on the Shat scale.
So Gene with a 1.833 repeating. I think this is movie. I got to update the chart. I think it's 168. So that now puts it all by itself in the 69 spot. Nice. It is better than Tombstone, Pet Sematary, and Tommy Boy. And it is slightly worse. I mean, by like 0.02 wipes. Worse than Who Framed Roger Rabbit, War Games, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Starship Trooper. Yeah. So it's right in that mix.
Yeah, I think it works.
Yeah. I think it's
the
fair.
system works.
Or I'd like to believe it works.
All right, now's the time where we do our shout-outs. We haven't done these in a bit, but shout-outs are our way of saying thank you for visiting shatthemovies.com. If you go to shatthemovies.com, I thought I'd eradicated it, but the form apparently still exists lurking and waiting for you guys. So you can go there and pop your name into it, and we'll read it on the air. This week's shout-outs go out to Big Mick Mike Farragher, Hunter Boone, Benny B and Mr. C did a great job as new hosts, The Real Wade Garrett, Ash Robinson, The Bev Show from Tasmania, Australia, Ryan Friel, This Gay Loves You Straight Guys, Big Ben from Wales, Saverio, Clarissa, Big Fargo, You Will Not Remove Shoutouts, This Is Bullshit, Teddy, Johnba is the Best Ba, Jen, Frank Fischera, Hey guys, I know you're not taking shoutouts anymore, but I'm just going to say I won't be listening to the podcast anymore. The shoutouts were the highlight, and it is bullshit that the actions of a few affect us all. Dig B, Hayden from Australia, a lot of Australia love, Sorsha, hey Sorsha, No Neck Ed, Big D's search history after looking at camel toe enhancement underwear, Wayne, and Lorne Michaels, the Lorne Michaels. So thanks everyone for your shout outs. Apparently, if you would like to hear a shout out, you can go to shatthemovies.com and search and search and search. It'll find a shout out box somewhere.
And don't tell the assholes, the ones who are ruining it for everybody. Just go and put nice ones.
Now, Big D, what is the next movie coming up on Shat the Movies?
So this might sound familiar if you listen to last week's episode, but we are going to be doing a movie commissioned by Andy Hunt, and it tells the story when planning with her boyfriend falls through, high school senior Chris Parker ends up babysitting for the Anderson kids, Brad and Sarah. What should be a quiet night in, however, turns into a series of ridiculous exploits, starting when they leave the house to pick up Chris' friend, Brenda. Soon, Brad's buddy, Daryl, is involved, and the group must contend with car thieves, blues musicians, and much more. It's commissioned again by Andy Hunt. It was released in June of 1987 and directed by Christopher Columbus.
Thank you, Andy, for that commission. And thank you, Dan and Carmelita and Ash for the commission as well. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. You can email us at hosts@shatthemovies.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can shop our Amazon affiliate link, complete a free anonymous survey, buy our merch, or commission your own movie. Find out information on how to do all of that by visiting our website, shatthemovies.com. Also, you can check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we do TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. Ash King B and I just put out the announcement pod for Lovecraft Country, which we'll be doing in August. So if you'd like to hear that every week from us, go ahead and subscribe that. Just search for it on wherever you find your podcasts at Lovecraft Country from Shat on Entertainment. And you can find all the information on all of our pods on the website, shatontv.com, wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, Ashley Schlafly, Roger Roper, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us next week for the following movie.
Go ahead. It's yours, Ashley. Say it.
And stay the fuck at home.
Hi.
I gotta cancel. Now she's stuck babysitting the Anderson kids. Sarah.
Mom got Chris to babysit for me.
Chris? Her brother Brad.
Oh my.
His best friend Daryl.
Who is this kid?
Stray dog.
Take good care of my baby. I'll guard her with my life.
What could possibly go wrong?
Chris, I'm in trouble.
Hang up and sit down. I'll be there in half an hour.
Well, I'm just out of school.
This is the night when things go from bad
My mom's car!
to worse.
Big city, scum sucker.
To ridiculous.
Wanna go to bed?
Hey, I like danger.
You should try babysitting.
And this is only the beginning.
Your friend is dead. Chris can handle it.
Sarah's probably hanging from the rafters by now.
Sarah, hold on! I'm still in control here.
You could say they were having a bad night.
Any problems? No, not really.
If they weren't having such a good time. Adventures in babysitting.
Think your parents will ever ask me to babysit again?
If they do, I'd ask them for $1 more an hour.